Hi, listeners. It's Natalie here for my penultimate episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. I have some feelings about that, but I'll wait until my ultimate episode to give a real goodbye. For this episode, I chatted with Louis Geller from Spore, which is a mushroom company based out of my home state of Maine. I have known about Spore since they were founded, which I think was about 10 years ago, and watched their business grow with great enthusiasm because their mission is really cool to bring mushroom cultivation to the masses. And they're doing it very successfully, putting together amazing educational resources to help people get going. I encourage you to check out some of the resources in the show notes for more specifics on cultivating different mushroom species and the different growing systems they've been working on. I got a little bit flustered during this conversation because my recorder and SD card was having some issues. And there are times when you'll hear that it kind of skips some of our conversation. I'm sorry. I apologize to you. And also big shout out to Michael, who does the editing, because this one was a little bit of a doozy. Funny enough, this was not the first time Louis encountered technical issues on a podcast interview. I guess he had to completely re-record an episode he did with the epic gardening podcast, The Beat. I didn't want to do that to him again. So here it is, our conversation. I still think it's really interesting. We talk about fungal ecology, what mushrooms need to thrive, and how you can introduce them to your farm or garden. There's a lot of energy around mushroom cultivation, and it feels like one of the really positive things happening in our food and farming culture from a bunch of different perspectives, as a really nutritious part of people's diets, as a way people can grow their own food and connect with one of the most amazing parts of the natural world, and as a way farms can diversify their offerings to customers. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Louis.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by ASAP, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project. ASAP, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, will offer the Business of Farming Conference on Saturday, February 22nd in Asheville, North Carolina. This annual conference brings together professional and aspiring farmers from across the Southeast to network and share resources to build viable farm businesses. Scholarships for BIPOC and limited resource farmers are available, as well as discounts for farm partners registering together. Registration opens in mid-November. Find out more at asapconnections.org. That's asapconnections.org. All right, enjoy the show.
Let's just start with you telling me a little bit about yourself. So like when you were a little kid, was your dream to work for a mushroom company? And did you always like mushrooms, or was that something that you came around to when you got a little older?
Well, I definitely had no real interest in mushrooms at all. I'm not even sure. I definitely never ordered them at restaurants. I think I would eat them because I wasn't a particularly picky eater. But I was always really into nature and spent a lot of time camping as a kid. And I think that's how a lot of these things start, and just loved all of it. My mom worked for the EPA, and so environmental science, and my dad was an environmental lawyer at one point. So it was really in my blood, and gave me some sort of guidance through to college, where I majored in environmental science. And that's how I found mushrooms. It was one book, you know.
Ooh, what was
So
the
as a
book?
kid, yeah, it was. So it really wasn't a kid as a child. I was primed for it, but the book was Mycelium Running by Paul Stamets. And one of these
Yeah.
days, I'll have to tell him. He's heard it a million times, but I got to tell him someday. I had some colleagues that just met him actually, but it's Mycelium Running was brought to my attention by a friend of mine in a ethnobotany class taught by Martin Quigley at the University of Denver. And Professor Quigley was really adamant that we for them. It's like, come up with some kind of research. Like, I'm looking to sponsor some. And so my friend Nick, who by crazy coincidence lives in Maine now too, he showed me this book and was like, hey man, like, you got to read this and let's like come up with a project based on this. And so I did, and my mind was blown. And we decided to grow some oyster mushrooms on contaminated straw.
What was it contaminated with?
So we went to some mine runoff sites in Colorado and collected like super contaminated water from various runoff points. And it was really interesting. You could just see how like some of them had a little bit of moss growing, some it was just like dead, and some it was like red, and like they were like, it was just clear that there were like different heavy metals happening in each water type. And the whole point was to show that these oyster mushrooms could pull heavy metals out of the substrate. So we soaked straw in that and then grew oyster mushrooms on it, and then had a physics professor zap the samples with his spectrometer and tell us the makeup. And lo and behold, it worked. The mushrooms can pull metals out of substrate. We're going to publish. It really was one of those success stories where along the way, I joined the Colorado Mycological Society. I bought a bunch of books and poured through them. And all of a sudden I was part of this community, and I was down the rabbit hole of becoming like a mushroom guy. It really was like the thing I needed that I had been looking for, that was kind of going to give me direction.
That's great. And so it was not a culinary introduction to mushrooms. It was more of the environmental.
Yeah, the mycoremediation was a big one, but just even more basic than that. I just hadn't really learned much about them at all, and they're super weird from festivals everywhere. And it's like everybody's got a mushroom guy at their farmers market, and there's mushroom people of all sorts doing amazing things, dyeing fabric with mushrooms, and it's just this zeitgeist, this revolution. There's a guy who, gosh, his name is escaping me this moment, but he's very well known and has a festival called Radical Mycology, and a book. The fest is more like people call it Rad Myco, but the festival, and that's in the Pacific Northwest. The book is Radical Mycology. He's got another book called The Mycocultural Revolution, and he really coined that term. What is his name? It's I'll think of it. I promise. It's I look at that book all the time, so it's ridiculous. But that's sort of what's going on, is this mycocultural revolution, and as people, we do get ahead of ourselves with like what it's sort of going to accomplish, right? Like, I learned a lot in that book by Paul Stamets, that Radical Mycology, about how mushrooms were going to help save the world, and they were going to do all these amazing things. And a lot of that mycoremediation stuff is just now, 20 years after the book was written, starting to gain a foothold. There's some commercial efforts. There's some B2B and some B2C efforts going on out there, but it's slow going to find the real practical applications for this, because it's tough to do it in a way that makes sense and is convincing to an organization like the EPA, for example.
I'm curious, like when I was growing up, to take it back to sort of this culinary aspect, when I was growing up in middle school, I became a vegetarian. And I remember
everywhere, every restaurant I ever went to, it was like the only vegetarian option was a portobello mushroom burger, or like grilled portobello mushrooms or something. And I have to admit, I did not really like them. And it was only later that I was like, mushrooms are amazing and delicious. And so I'm curious, what is your favorite mushroom and your favorite way to prepare it?
You sometimes hear mushroom folks like myself and people in the portobello, which, by the way, if your listeners don't know, they are the same species at this point. They're just, grown out to be more mature, and they're perhaps different strains and things like that. But I think those are great, when prepared well. Button mushrooms are really, really tasty. I have to say, the mushroom that I feel from a culinary, from a cultivation perspective, from a visual perspective, it just has to be my favorite. And it's sort of a boring answer, is shiitake. And there are others that I find to be amazing, especially wild ones. Like last year, I tried the chestnut bolete for the first time, and what a lovely mushroom. Perfect texture, like nutty flavor, like really, really good little bolete. And I have those experiences. Hen of the Woods is phenomenal when prepared right. I have a friend. I just told him today that I want to order more of his Hen of the Woods jerky that he makes. That's really, really good. But on like a base level and what I interact with and cultivate, shiitake. I have many, many logs in our backyard here at North Spore. Not maybe 30 good shiitake logs, and we've got other species too. And several weeks ago, we dunked them again. We soaked them in water, which can instigate growth very predictably. And we just had logs covered in shiitake, and that's just and they're already 3-year-old logs, and that's just the coolest thing to me. So we got pounds and pounds out of that.
So you mentioned North Spore, and I don't actually think that we clarified that you work for North Spore. Can you tell me a little?
For North Spore, started off in a little garage in Westbrook, Maine, growing fresh mushrooms using sort of lower tech methods, just oysters essentially, and then grew from there when I started into just a larger fresh mushroom provider, into companies and just mushroom product supply companies. We kind of do everything in ways that almost nobody else does. We have a wellness line. We're coming out with mushroom coffee, and we have chocolate bars and tinctures. We have grow chambers like our Boom Room and Boomer Bin. We have spawn that we sell to hobbyists and farmers, and grow kits of various kinds. We sell dried mushrooms, and we do events. We do all sorts of things. And so from when I joined, 75, 80 people, which is amazing to see. And we're known kind of far and wide internationally. And a big part of that is our YouTube presence. We've got a lot. We put out a lot of content, a lot of educational content that's become foundational to a lot of people, since sort of we're OGs in this world a little bit. When we go to events, it's really, really amazing. People will come up to us and say, I'm here because I watched your videos. Just this past annual Sam Ristich foray in Cape Cod, just for a day with a colleague of mine. And it's really cool. These are people who are like diehard conservationists and the like really experienced mushroom identifiers, foragers. And they had presentations by, lots of people with PhDs, like microscopy, genetics, very, very skilled people. And what was my point on that? What was I
just how North Spore has created this presence?
Oh, yeah. So I was walking out to the bus to go on a foray, and this guy just walks right up to me. He goes, "Oh, you're Louie from North Spore." And I go, "Yeah, man, what's up?" And he's like, "Oh, I've watched all your videos. They're great. They've helped me so much." And that kind of like spontaneous stuff happens, especially in that kind of scene, right?
Yeah.
But it's cool that is an element of what we do. as
Yeah.
well. And so we've shaped, I think, a lot of the mushroom scene in a way that's hard to quantify.
That's amazing.
So we have a little studio space in the mill that we used to be in. Now we used to be in the Dana Wart Mill in Westbrook, and now we're in right on Riverside in Portland, like 8 minutes away from there. But we were in there, and it has these big windows. It was getting really hot, and but we really loved those guys. We really enjoyed hanging out with Epic Gardening, and we showed them around our facility, and we inoculated logs with them, and so it was very comfortable. Jacques is a really good guy, and so it was, not too big a deal to keep just talking about mushrooms.
You're like,
but,
okay, do we attempt to have the exact same conversation again, or do we just have
Yeah.
a different conversation? Yeah.
Right. There's always something weird, like, did we say that already or not? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when you're sleep deprived.
Mhm.
Okay, so North Spore is now one of the sort of leading mycology companies in the country, which is amazing, and it's great to have you all so close in Maine. My mother loves getting the little boxes for people for Christmas gifts, and it is super fun. Kids love it. I'm wondering though, those are sort of something that those are not about price. Those are about like having the experience, having these amazing mushrooms. But when it comes to commercial growers, what are you supplying for them? And just, can you tell me a little more about the commercial grower side of your operation?
It's funny. It seems obvious to you that it's not really about price. And what you mean by that is it's not necessarily about like the value of the mushrooms you're growing versus buying the mushrooms at the store.
And I should clarify that like a lot of those mushrooms need reasons. Like you can't get them at the store, even if you could. It's just yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. But and that's totally true. There's so many reasons why it has the value it has, and it's the experience, it's the convenience, and the freshness and the species that we're offering. But so many people reach out to us and they go like, well, am I going to get enough mushrooms to make this worth it? And actually, the truth is, I think you really can. When you price it out and you look at what those would cost at a farmer's market, and if you do it well and you get multiple flushes out of your box, because they're perfectly capable of 3 at all times. Like if you're not getting 3, it's about hydration almost always. Mold can happen, but I mean, my dad, who's not a professional horticulturalist or hasn't really done much with mushrooms, he got 5 flushes out of his last pink oyster box.
Oh, wow.
Because of moisture. And so at that point, he probably got like 2 pounds or so of mushrooms. And this is a 4-pound box. So that's a lot of biological efficiency. That's a lot of food coming directly from a block of sawdust. And, if you do the math on what, we used to sell, I mean, maybe it was half or 3/4 of a pound. We would do it by volume a lot of the time, just by pints and quarts. That would have been like $12. So you start to do the math on it, and it starts to make a whole lot more sense if you're doing a good job there. But yeah, that the point is more for the experience, and it doesn't make sense if someone wants consistent mushroom production to get endless spray and grow kits. That definitely doesn't make a lot of sense. And we have other options. I could go into those options if you would like.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I would.
No, for sure. It's definitely a progression that we think of, give people this clear path into mycology. And the first step, and it can be a little confusing to people, is going to the fruiting blocks. And the fruiting blocks are essentially the same thing as the spray and grow kit. They're typically a little larger. Not typically, they're a pound bigger. And they don't come in a fancy box with a little sprayer. They're just in their bag with a sticker on them. And that's more if you already know what you're doing. If you already have a sprayer, if you already if you want to get a bit more out of it, maybe you have a grow chamber already. And we offer all of those spray and grow kit species plus a bunch more. And so there's a lot of people who just get fruiting blocks, but even that can get expensive. And then so people talk about, okay, can I make my own fruiting blocks? And we sell spawn. And I would say the vast majority of our commercial growers are buying spawn. There are other models. There's another company here in Maine called Cap and Stem, and they sell larger fruiting blocks. And the goal for them is hundreds of mushrooms, sells them, and that's their model. They never deal with spawn. They're never actually creating the fruiting blocks. But most of our customers, our commercial customers, are. And one bag of spawn, it's a 6-pound bag of grain that is fully colonized. It's millet and wheat. And one of those bags can make, 20 to 40 fruiting blocks, let's say, depending on how big your bags are and what your spawn rate is. But that makes it really, really efficient.
So that sort of converted it into efficiency. Like, okay, you've got, from the 4 pounds of substrate, you end up with these, 2 pounds of mushroom and the efficiency of that. But so rewind a little bit. Basic fungal ecology. What do fungi need to grow? And why are there some mushrooms that you can cultivate and some that must be wild harvested?
Yeah, these are really important questions. I was using some big vocab words there that are important to kind of get to. A lot of this, we know sort of intuitively, or people kind of will ask the question, and then it makes sense because it does. That mushrooms are about 90% water. So number one, they need a lot of water, a lot of moisture. And all of the mushrooms that we are growing are saprotrophs, meaning they eat dead stuff. They're like external stomachs. They're exuding chemicals, just like our stomachs do, enzymes to digest their plants, more like us, in fact, because they're not, the plants are autotrophs. They're going photosynthesis. It's a whole different ballgame. And the ability of fungi to digest lignin and cellulose and free up the nutrients within and make those things available for plants again is the whole beautiful cycle of life right there. And it's so crucial for the forest. So they need light. Do I just need to stick these in a dark basement or a dark closet? They don't like light. Light will ruin them. No, totally wrong. Think about a dappled forest. Think about that. It's low light, but it really has more to do with humidity. If something is being blasted by sun, it tends to have lower humidity. So they find those really humid areas. It's more of a relation there than it is about the light. And they do need light. They'll produce vitamin D. They'll produce pigments. They grow better around light. It's important to have some. But, just natural light from windows tends to be enough. But really, really interesting. So you got light. And then the other is airflow. They breathe like us. They inhale oxygen and they exhale carbon dioxide, and they need a lot of it sometimes, especially something like oysters need a ton of it. Really, it's almost like as much fresh air as we do. And that's just a critical thing to think about is gas exchange. You can't just grow mushrooms in a closed terrarium. There needs to be thought out gas exchange, and the mushrooms will tell you if they need air. They'll grow in a mutated fashion, in a very distorted way, if they're starved of oxygen.
And not just air above ground, but they also need air in the substrate that they're growing on, right? Like I was watching one of your YouTube videos, and I loved that someone said something about thinking about particle size of the substrate because you need to keep it aerated.
Yeah, you don't want too much compaction, definitely, and too much moisture and compaction together, you get anaerobic conditions, and that's really not good. When we first started growing mushrooms, and actually, I started this way, funny enough, but um, it wasn't at North Spore. Is growing in 5-gallon buckets using straw, and that is really good for oyster mushrooms. And you don't need super sterile conditions. You don't need to be super clean about it. You don't need giant pressure cookers. Pasteurizations. We used hydrated lime to get to a pH of about 12.5, and the straw it drains well, right? And the oysters can then get into that clean substrate, and they actually like it a little basic, and just take over. So particle size matters a great deal. We moved from the buckets to bags, and this is a big. Imagine having sadly, there is a lot of plastic waste, but this is how it's done. Is you go to these sort of one-time use bags, and they have built-in filter patches, and the bags can handle this intense cooking and all the enzymes and all of that the mushrooms secrete. And the filter patches allow the organism to breathe, and you need to have there's air in there through the substrate, and it won't get to the bottom of the bag, and that can be part of the problem. There is just like air kind of penetration. But they don't need a ton during that colonization phase, in comparison to fruiting, which makes sense. I mean, how much air really is in a log or in the soil in comparison?
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. If you grow plants, you know that to a farm of any size, your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for the highest performing and most cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed starting soils, foliar sprays, and disease and insect controls, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm, too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in their Plant Pro and the Seed Catapult potting soils, and put their ReVita fertilizers in your soil before you plant, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humate, and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soils and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com, now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. All right, back to the show.
I've never taken any formal class on mycorrhizae, or I took I've taken a couple soil classes, but they were different. They were more like geomorphology and hydrology. I never took like makeup of the soil in terms of the organisms within it, and much less fungi. That was definitely not offered at my school, and I'd love to do so now. And it's just something that I think about a lot, and it's so fascinating.
So getting back to the ecology, that question. Why can you cultivate some mushrooms and some not?
Right. I mentioned everything we grow can just grow on dead stuff in a bag. Right. That's why we can cultivate it. But there's so many other mushrooms, many, many more of them, that require special relationships with plants. These are called mycorrhizal species. And that mycorrhizal relationship is prevalent in 95% of plants. And so because they require this relationship, the forest is the only place you're really going to get them. Now, we can start to think about cultivating these things alongside plants, and there's maybe ways to do it. You can grow a forest, you can do agroforestry, and I think mushrooms will have a place in that more and more. But kind of getting into what's happening there a little more, is it's sort of an exchange of goods. It's a marketplace of nutrients where the tree may be providing a bunch of carbon and whatnot to the mycorrhizae, and the mycorrhizae is providing phosphorus, and sugars, and water to the tree. And there are species that are producing mushrooms that do this. Some of our favorites, like chanterelles, but there's also stuff that we'll never see that's living within the roots and living within the soil, that's making this all happen. And even pervasive, connecting tree to tree in the woods. And so these mycorrhizal species are wonderful, very special. Another one, porcinis. People ask us pretty regularly. They'll send us an email, hey, can you help me grow porcinis? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, we really can't. That's just beyond us at this time. People have cultured chanterelles, I think, and but the best thing you can do is try and spread them potentially in the area by like a around. May have some of how clear that is in terms of that being able to work. But that's the big difference, is why we can grow certain things and why we can't grow others, is because these others are mycorrhizal, and that's why foraging is so wonderful and special.
You talked about spawn and substrate. Do certain species prefer certain substrates? What are the different options for substrates? And then I guess we'll get into sort of the different growing methods that people are using.
Yeah, it's really fast. Every organic material on the planet probably has some fungal association breakdown. Some fungus that has evolved to break it into its constituent parts, whether it's the antlers of a deer or elephant dung. There are fungal species that are specialized to all of it. There's an estimated, I think I saw the number yesterday, actually, 2.2 million to 3.8 million species of fungus. And, we are rapidly learning more of them, but we've only identified, I think maybe it's a couple 100,000, maybe. And so they're eating everything. And there are primary decomposers a lot of the time that we look at in our woods, for example, that come in right after a tree dies, or when there's damage or a dead portion of the tree, or maybe even they're alive and it's diseased. So they act sometimes more as a parasite. But there's those primary decomposers, and then there's secondary decomposers that come in, and there's just a whole succession that can happen. Just like when a whale dies and falls to the bottom of the ocean, and you get all these different creatures that come in. I like to think of a tree kind of like a whale in that way. But when you have really, really broken down material, think manure, you have all those other species that come in that really like the manure, the well composted material. Oysters aren't going to really love that very much, but agaricus species like the button mushroom love that. So that's they definitely want different things. It's all about the proportion of available nutrients within. Obviously, the hydration matters, nitrogen matters, protein matters. You have things like cordyceps, which grows on protein-rich substrate because in nature it grows on bugs, caterpillars.
Hey, everyone, I'm just interjecting here because this was a question that didn't really get recorded well, but I asked Louis how they get the mushroom inoculum into the substrates.
The industry is just using grain. You could use oats and wheat and rye and corn and millet, any of that. And you're basically cooking and hydrating grain to a certain degree, sterilizing it, and then you're introducing the organism either through liquid culture or agar. And so you can actually take a clone, essentially. It's sort of like grafting. You can take a piece of the mushroom and you can put it on a plate and you can on an agar plate and spread that mycelium. It'll spread right from the tissue, and then you can take pieces of that. You can put that in liquid. You can put it on new agar plates, or you can put it right to grain, and it will spread. And it's just a process of extrapolation from there, where we do it this way. We take pieces of agar and we inoculate 3-pound millet and wheat bags, and then when those are colonized, we actually use that to make a bunch of our 6-pound spawn bags. And then those bags will or so each time. And it's all the same individual. It's all the same organism. Our blue oyster, it's like the same person, so to speak. It's the same strain throughout. And a great analogy that I use all the time is apples. If people orchardists took the seeds from a Honeycrisp apple every time they grew the apples and then grew from seed, they wouldn't have those same apples anymore very, very quickly. So they want to keep that genetic trait, those genetic traits. So they graft.
So yeah, I'm particularly interested in how mushroom production might fit into different kinds of farms that have different resources available, like a farm that has a woodlot versus an urban farm versus a farm with a hoop house or an orchard that has these perennial beds. So what are the different ways that mushrooms can fit into these operations?
It's such a good and timely question to help with a larger project we have of kind of turning all of our knowledge into some modules, really educational modules, and it's going to be awesome, into sort of courses that kind of are the best resource with all of our information kind of in one cohesive place that can bring different types of customers through this journey. And we got this grant for outdoor cultivation, which is really my specialty. And so I'm sort of starting there. And one of the kind of mandates of it is that we have an event for farmers. And so we have something that we do every year called Mycology Outside. And it's like a mushroom camp, and we're going to, I think, try. Maybe we'll tailor that towards like a time to really get farmers some hands-on experience with this stuff. But we think a lot about what this can do on a farm, and there's a lot of historical precedent for some of it, right? Shiitakes. They've been grown for 1,000. Really, the leader created this incredibly crop that works all over the place. It works really well here in New England. And so farmers can absolutely utilize that. And we've got lots of woods here. So growing something like shiitake can very easily be a crop for farms of various types. And I've seen it. I've seen people at the Portland Farmers Market start to dabble with shiitake and offer it alongside their other veggies, which is a great one. So it's probably the king, I would say, on the outside. There are other things to consider, though. There's wood ear that isn't done enough, which is done in massive scale on logs in China. In the South, there are things like paddy straw and milky mushroom. And kind of on that note, we have things like wine cap that we can offer for growing in beds. And the benefits are not just the mushrooms themselves in that case. The benefits we're just learning about the myriad benefits, about the fact that you're breaking that material down faster into soil that is then nutrition for your plants. It's retaining moisture. It's fighting harmful nematodes. It may even be increasing mycorrhizal relationships, down the line, and increasing that soil health in that way. So you're really building the health of your soil by doing it. Because the truth is, I think it's a tough proposition for wine cap to be a farmer. It's just not going to be as easy to predict what it's doing and get a consistent amount out of it. When it's there, sure, sell it. A lot of people do. we've got lots of farmers. My friends at Winslow Farm, they do a bunch of that and have gotten grants to do more of that. And it will be something you can sell, but I have yet to be convinced.
So is that more like, all right, you're already mulching this space with straw. You might as well throw some inoculum out there and just see what happens. Like it's a low.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can grow on almost anything, something like wine cap. Shiitake, they want, hardwood logs. Wine cap, it's going to grow on almost any agricultural waste. And it has a bunch of other benefits being a colonized substrate there, and you get edible mushrooms out of it that are really tasty. It's a very cool thing to do.
How is their shelf like? I know one of the things about shiitake that is so nice is that they do last a while.
Like they're lasting a week in the fridge too. They're fine, similar to button mushrooms. You just don't see them as much. They just haven't entered mass cultivation. You can grow them inside too. It's not done as much. They tend not to work as well. But you definitely can grow them inside. And so wine cap is it's sort of the shiitake of the bed world. And there's a lot of people working on figuring out what its capabilities are. We've got a guy, Noah Olson, over at the University of Vermont, doing probably the biggest wine cap study I've ever heard of. Maybe the biggest one that's, I don't know, of its kind that's ever been done. But I think we gave him more than 150 bags of spawn, and he was basically testing wine cap in many, many different scenarios, using cannabis waste around cannabis plants, to see what the results are. What does it do to their growth? And he's finding all sorts of interesting things. I'm eager to see his results. This is his second year, and I think that's going to be, I think it's 2 years, and then we'll see what he kind of comes up with there. But
that's really interesting. I'm writing his name down as someone I could maybe talk to in the future, because that sounds really interesting.
He's a cool guy. He does good work. And we had him at Mycology Outside this summer as a guest to speak on the work he's doing. Dense, tough mycelium bricks, sawdust blocks, and you can take those, you can bake them, and you've got mycomaterials. You've got they're very resistant to all sorts of things, to various rots and fire, and
is that what they're using for? I know there was a surfboard company that was trying to use mycelium. Is that what they're using?
Almost certainly.
Okay.
They're almost certainly using reishi. Like, I don't know. People are trying to keep this sort of thing secret. I don't know. I don't care. But it's I
can tell them to edit that out too if that's not.
No, I don't think you need to. I'm not beholden to the surfboard
company. Right?
I do know that they, along with other companies who are trying to do things in the ocean, it's very difficult because the ocean is tough and eats everything. And so that is still a very tough challenge. Things are not holding up. There hasn't been really the breakthrough yet in figuring out how to really keep, because even though these blocks are tough, they don't last more than, I don't know, a few months.
Yeah.
They still start to break down.
I saw
the ocean.
I saw another company that was making coolers, like to replace styrofoam coolers.
Yeah.
And
that's a great use case.
Yeah. Okay, so there's just so much to talk about, but you mentioned that wine caps are sort of like the shiitake version, like entry level bed producing mushrooms. So if you're looking to get started, and you've got logs, then shiitake is a great option, easy. And if you got beds, wine cap is an easy option. What are some of the other log options, bed options, and is there a growing method that we haven't talked about?
Yeah. So logs, there's a bunch of other ones. I have some chestnuts, for example, growing on logs right now out back. I probably missed them. I was going to harvest them a couple days ago. And they were already like full grown. But yeah, chestnuts on some maple out back. Things like oysters, reishi, um, hen of the woods. You can grow lots of things on logs, and they have varying degrees of difficulty and yield and things like that. You can grow lion's mane. Lion's mane actually works great. It just isn't going to have the yields that shiitake has. But it find them in your backyard. Idea of success. I talked about this a little bit earlier, so that's perfect. You might start with wine cap, and you get your wine cap. Maybe the bed lasts 2-3 years, and there may be other mushrooms that appear, natural weathering, and all the work that the mushrooms do to break down that material. And you've harvested a bunch and you've eaten a bunch of wine cap and you're real happy with it. Well, you end up with this pretty broken down material. You could then plant more of a secondary decomposer into that. Something like the almond agaricus, which is a relative of the button mushroom that we sell. It's more delicious. It smells like almonds. It's really good. And it likes composted material. So then you could plant that and get a whole other crop and continue to break that down using something that's more specialized to that, which I think is really great. So the almond agaricus likes, if you already have more manure on hand, and then you can just start with almond. You don't want fresh manure, by the way. You want it to be weathered. You want all the ammonia and stuff gone. But you can grow oysters in beds. You can grow chestnut in beds too. You can probably grow piapino in beds. You can grow blewit in beds, which is something that I need to do this fall before it gets too late. The blewit is Lepista nuda. It's a purple mushroom that's very like fragrant, and it comes after a frost, usually up here in Maine. And it's just a really delicious, like delightful mushroom. And cultivating it is sort of on the fringes, and it works. It's not going to be super productive, but it's a really cool way to use leaves. Everybody's got these big bags of leaves, and they just put them by the curb, and it's such a shame. It's such a useful resource, creating leaf mold and using that as a mulch. And there's so many things you can do with it. And one of the things you can do is just put it into a bed and inoculate the bed with blewit. And it really loves leaves. That's definitely the key ingredient.
Do you find that whole leaves are okay, or that it works better if you chop the leaves up into smaller particle size? Like I know when you're using leaves as mulch, it's kind of it can get kind of anaerobic if you just use the leaves because they sort of pile together like plates. Is it similar?
Yeah, you're gonna. I've seen success both ways, frankly, but I think chopping it up is awesome. It's a better idea. You get more surface area. It's a really good way to go. And even layering with a little bit of other stuff. Blewit's going to be growing on kind of like the forest floor, path edges, kind of mixed material in it. It's gonna like some woodier stuff in there. So to kind of add some aeration, you could throw in a layer of wood chips to keep things from getting too compacted, or even mix it all up. We often layer, and we talk about sort of the lasagna method. It's the easiest, but things could be mixed more if you wanted to mix in some chips to add some different particle sizes and have better aeration in some chopped leaves. Like, go for it. Or even just wood chips on top as like to help hold in moisture. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and as long as they have access to that food source they like, they'll go after it. It may take some breakdown of those. It may take a while. These things, you have different time frames. Logs, they need to colonize for a whole year. And some beds, it's more like 2 to 4 months. Um, Blewit, it seems to be more like a full year or close to that, and a lot more about. I definitely wouldn't claim to know totally how this one ticks and what it's capable of, but I just love that we know it loves leaves. And it likes the cool weather. It's just another one kind of on the shoulder seasons.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. It's nice to think about the seasonality of things and being able to offer, not just yourself, but being able to offer your customers a really cool mushroom this late in the season is nice.
Right. Yeah. I think that it has be able to deal with the harsh temperatures and just kind of get in there right at the end when you're doing a lot of your other fall cleanup and um, fall planting things. And you can do that with wine cap too. But it's certainly one to think about. Like you might not do that with almond because almond's a warmer weather one. You want to do almond in the spring, you know? And so they definitely do. It is something to consider.
You mentioned earlier that the main reason why folks might not get the number of flushes that they really could, why they might not maximize the potential, is water. So, can you talk a little bit about managing water for mushroom production?
Yeah. We were talking about commercial growers and we talked about outdoor stuff, beds and logs, but these small farms, if they've got a room somewhere in a barn, whatever, that isn't being used, they could be growing indoors as well. And they could do buckets in a very similar way to what North Spore did, or they can do bags hanging and you can start a small indoor operation, have that be supplemental as well. And there are plenty of people that do that. We have more commercial growers who just focus on mushrooms, though. Definitely. A lot of the people who I think are doing both may not be in our commercial program and kind of under the radar. Like we don't really know that they're doing both because they're not part of the commercial program. Um, but um, I wanted to say that, but I'm sorry, I sort of lost the thread.
No,
Yeah.
that's totally fine. I was asking about moisture management, and even
Oh, yes.
not just for the indoor production, but like for outdoor production as well. Are there things that people should consider?
Yeah, and that's why I know why I thought of that. And the reason is because indoor producers, they're going to set up misters and hydrofoggers and drip lines potentially. Well, not really drip lines, mist lines. And so you can do some of that same stuff outside. Definitely people do. And there's a lot of that happens in like greenhouses. Well, growing in the US, it depends so much on where you're at. In Maine, you really just want to get water them during the or in anywhere in New England, really. You really just want to water during the drier periods. But you got to think about initial edit, like dunking your logs. You want to think about a water source. It's called a forced fruiting, and it's really very, very useful and important if you want to get the most logs next to a stream or a pond. Our friends at Winslow Farm, they've got a right there where they keep their logs. We just use a big trough, but having a hose that can go out to that to think about these things. And we had a long dry period. You know, in Maine, and so I was out there watering a lot to supplement that. And so when you put the mulch, that's typically an easy thing to dry. You're going to be watering your plants, and by extension, you're watering the substrate. But it is just super, super key to think about. And again, the mushrooms will tell you a lot of the time. They're going to grow during when there's big temperature drops. And I have some theories that, obviously the temperature drops and rain and stuff, there are pressure changes as well, but I wonder if indoor you could manipulate some pressure, atmospheric pressure, and it would instigate growth. I'm thinking about that a lot. Yeah, yeah, those changes in the atmosphere and those changes in temperature and rain are gonna cause growth. But you can do that artificially too. You really can. You just never want you always want substrate to feel sort of like a wet, wrung out sponge. We call it field capacity. And you want to try and maintain that. And logs, it's more like you never want to let logs go below if you can avoid it. I let some logs this summer because my logs are not in the best spot, get pretty dry, and you'll lose more bark and you'll get splitting and you'll get volunteer mushrooms when you are hydrating and drying. And hydrating and drying, you want to maintain like at least a 50% moisture content in the logs. And a lot of people, when they, especially for prepping firewood, will have moisture meters so they can just stick onto the log and it'll tell them.
I'm curious, you mentioned the grant that you got. Is that a SARE grant? Or
yes, it is.
Okay. So the whole idea of that grant is to create educational videos for commercial growers.
Essentially, yes. It's going to be targeting more of the commercial side than I think the hobbyist, although it's sort of the same. And it's just a matter of scale in a lot of it. Yeah, it's going to be video content. It's going to be this event. There's more. This is brand meeting on Monday to learn more about the grant myself. And yesterday was the first day I began sort of putting down my first draft of like the structure of this, and started thinking about, okay, what resources and people do I need to tap? What questions do I have that I need to know? Because there's a lot of stuff that like China is doing that I need to like see how much I can learn about. And there's a lot of farms out there, large scale shiitake farms, that may be doing things that I'm not aware of. But I do have connections, and I aim to find out during this process.
Nice. Well, I'm sure that'll be a super valuable resource. And the resources you have on your website and your YouTube channel are already great. And I will drop some of the other ones that you mentioned, like the Cornell small farms, and into the show notes. And so people will have access to a lot more resources, because I know it's we could do a whole show about just the nitty gritty of mushroom production. But I'm really glad we, fungal ecology and all of that. So it's been really great talking with you, and maybe we will have another conversation in the future.
Yeah, I'd really like that. There are a lot of other topics to talk about, and experiences and interesting people in the field. And I just, I think that it's really, really cool and really big rush to go outside and see mushrooms growing, and to think about their role in your garden in a whole different way.
Diets too, like it's very funny. I sometimes crave mushrooms, and I'm like, there must be something that I'm not getting. Like I need it. I need mushrooms right now.
Yeah, and they're full of nutrition, and one of the biggest things is that they're largely fiber. They're largely like prebiotic fiber that is feeding your gut microbiome, and so like super, super important. I always have like one medical piece of advice, right? I'm sort of biased in that way, but a lot of times I talk to people when they're like, I have this stomach issue or that stomach issue or autoimmune issue, and I'm like, hey, like it all comes down to like what you're eating in the gut, and like, are you eating enough mushrooms, like legitimately? Because that is a huge factor with health, and a lot of people don't eat any.
Yeah.
And so
especially in this culture, like my husband is from Japan, and so any grocery store you can find lots and lots of mushrooms, and I love that. And you can buy inoculated shiitake logs in the hardware store. So
right,
maybe
that's wild.
Maybe we'll be there someday.
Exactly. I hope so. And we've got we've made a lot of progress, and yes, I think we will.
All right. It was great talking with you, and yeah, we'll be in touch.
You too. Talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks again, Louis, for chatting with me. I wish we had an opportunity for a follow-up conversation, because there's so much we didn't cover. But I also know that their YouTube channel and educational resources are incredible, and that's really where you should head if you want more information. All right, I will see you all next time for my ultimate episode. Hope you're doing well.
hope you enjoyed that episode. Always make sure to check the links in the show notes for how to follow our guests and hosts. The No-Till Market Garden podcast is a free show that is supported by folks like you who contribute every month over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That support helps ensure all the shows we do, from the Seed Farmer podcast to the Winter Growers podcast, the Collaborative Farming podcast, the Composter podcast, Growers Daily, and of course, the No-Till Market Garden podcast, can continue to go and grow. You can also find books and hats as well as an active forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge thank you to editor Michael Sellis and producer Jackson Roulette for all their work on this show and the rest of the team over at no-tillgrowers.com. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed wherever you're hearing this so you don't miss the next episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. See you then.